I hate the adversaries. 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 I hate the... Brothers and sisters, welcome to episode 11 of the Son of the North podcast. A little bit of a different podcast today. As I'm sure you're aware, the chaos of our times has left me in a rather tenable situation, but I look towards it without despair. I thought I'd change up the intro for today's show to better suit the topics we're going to address today. I've been receiving a good amount of constructive feedback from you listeners. A good amount of you think that the intro is perhaps a bit long, so I thought I'd directly kind of interrupt the intro this episode. If you feel like the intro is too long and you think it should be shorter, let me know. Send me a message on Instagram. The little skit I came up with for the intro is a parody on that I hate the Antichrist meme. And obviously this is kind of a dramatized account of how the servants of the adversary, the state, are enforcing these tyrannical medical policies. Perhaps it's not so crazy. I mean, if we look at the unfortunate situation of our brothers and sisters in Australia, it's already, I wouldn't even say bordering on tyranny. It's tyranny in place. And perhaps for those of us here in North America, that's not too far off. Here in Canada, the next federal election will occur on September 20th. This election will decide whether or not the current incumbent Prime Minister, the Liberal Justin Trudeau, will retain his government, possibly even gaining a majority, or if he will be overthrown by the quote-unquote Conservative Party, who themselves adopt a platform pretty similar to the Liberal Party. The only real difference between these two platforms is that the leader of the Conservatives is not Justin Trudeau. There are, of course, a number of other smaller parties with different platforms that people could vote for, but alas, the vast majority of Canadians will not vote for them simply because they are so intellectually deficient that they like to imagine we are the Americans, in the sense that only one of the two major parties can win. They believe that you have to vote red or vote blue because only these parties have won historically, and therefore no other party ever has a chance of winning. If you follow my page on Instagram, you notice that I somewhat support the purple political party, which is known as the People's Party. Despite the seemingly socialist name, this is actually probably what we could consider a more conservative traditionalist party, or at least conservative from the lens of the 1990s. Of course, mainstream media labels this party as far-right, and milquetoast conservatives won't vote for them simply because they're so rooted in this idea that only the blue party or the red party can win, that they believe that they need to vote blue to get rid of Justin Trudeau, despite the fact that, other than the different leaders, the policies of the Liberal and the Conservative Party are essentially the same. You could think of the Conservative Party in Canada as liberalism on a slow drip. Either way, neither party will revive my nation and its economy. Neither party will spend any time protecting Canada's infinite natural beauty, and neither will rescind oppressive gun rights laws. In short, there is no political solution, but I'm sure you already knew that. Indeed, in these times, we must look for solutions for the ailments of our time outside of modern society. You can think of it this way. Most modern Western nation-states are bloated corpses. We cannot save them because they're already dead and they're already decaying, no matter which surgeon we choose. They all make these grand, lofty promises, but something that has died cannot be brought back from death. And so, what can we do? Should we give up hope? Give in to the schemes of the adversaries? Of course not. We must look forward to the future, create new opportunities for our people, and strive to be heroic figures that will be emulated amongst our descendants for generations to come. Now, to get on to the real topic of this video. As those of you who follow me on Instagram are aware, on September 15th, 2021, I was let go from my job as an archaeological field consultant. My contract was terminated without cause by my company. After consulting with some friends educated in the ways of employment law, I've come to recognize that without cause essentially means that my employers were giving me the opportunity to apply for unemployment insurance and to get a last paycheck. Therefore, I didn't really commit an offense that was worthy of a firing with cause, which would mean that I would be denied such things. That being said, my termination letter states that I was fired because I wasn't a good fit for the company, and that if I use them as a reference in the future, they will only provide the dates of my employment and provide the potential employer with my position. So this is kind of a mysterious situation. It seems like they're not really holding a grudge against me, but clearly I was doing something that they didn't like, or something that didn't jive with the corporation's ethos. While my higher-ups were hesitant to reveal any potential reason as to why my employment would have been terminated, after a bit of prodding, I coaxed one of my higher-ups into admitting that it had something to do with health and safety regulations. Now, I found this particularly odd. I was always quite safe in the field. I mean, I've had a previous severe injury in life that has made me take safety to be a top priority ever since I was a little kid. So the question stands, what health and safety violations was I responsible for? For those of you well-versed in the issues of our time, the answer is probably quite obvious. I live in a rather conservative area, and probably more so than any other region in Canada, there is a vast amount of the local population here that is against shots. Now, by shots, you obviously understand what I'm referring to, but for the purposes of not triggering the algorithm, I will continue to use this term. Among this population, and even among the members of this population who have had their shots, the majority of them are against the idea of mandating them for access to certain services and employment. Unfortunately, given that I was working in the environmental consulting sector, and that the vast majority of jobs in the environmental consulting industry require university degrees, I found myself in a workplace environment dominated by people who hold authoritarian leftist views. Now, obviously, I was an academic, and I spent a lot of time in academia and was exposed to these types of people before. I know that you need to hide your power level to an extent. If you hold views contrary to those of radical leftists, you need to not discuss them simply for the sake of keeping the peace so that you can continue on with your daily life, so that you may work and provide for your family. I'm not an idiot, and so, of course, in this workplace environment, I never said anything about my views. I wouldn't identify myself with any particular ideology, but what does matter to me is my people, my nation, and preserving the beauty of the land that I live in, preserving the wondrous nature of Canada. Of course, to the vast majority of people with left-leaning views, anything less than the absolute hatred and desire for destruction of your own people is seen as Nazism. I should have known that simply not saying anything wouldn't be enough in their eyes. It's quite funny that some people look down on us for being quote-unquote cultists, when, in the context of this particular issue, so many people in the modern world are adherents to the cult of medicine. As an archaeologist, I worked in the field with my team, and there was many days where we would spend hours in the car driving to the site where we would be doing work for the day. Often on those drives, the topic of the shot would come up, and sometimes the topic of passport mandates for the shot would come up. Of course, like the good boys they were, the majority of the field staff would talk about their shots, which particular brand they had gotten, how they had felt afterwards, and how they felt that it was necessary for overcoming this horrible disease that kills less than 1% of the Canadian population. They also, of course, talked about how excited they were for these authoritarian policies to be implemented on their fellow Canadians. They were excited to see how their people will suffer by not being able to access bars and restaurants, the gym, and possibly employment because they weren't doing their part to stand up to this disease by not taking an experimental drug. Of course, they enthusiastically talked about such things and were so confident in their views on such topics because they believed that holding these views was for the good of their fellow citizens. Clearly, they care about our health and well-being, and the way to show that they care about our health and well-being is by denying us opportunities to work out and to feed our families. Now, I've avoided talking about this subject because it is fairly contentious and it's not a black and white issue. It's fairly nuanced. But I believe that if you can do your own research and come to your own conclusions, you should be able to make the decision that you think is best for you, and more importantly, best for the future of your family and your loved ones. I personally have not received the shot, and I will continue to be that way for a number of reasons. Now, I never discussed the fact that I had not taken the shot with my coworkers. I barely even touched on the topic at all when it was brought up. I would simply nod my head and continue on what I was doing. In fact, oftentimes I would just go on Instagram and I would start curating the comments on my posts or perhaps work on drafts for the next day's post. Foolish me, thinking that I would be able to feed myself without having to prostrate to the cult of science. If I didn't kiss the ass of the servants of the adversaries, the same people who, ironically enough, were keeping down my largely middle-class coworkers and relegating them to a position of serfdom within the upcoming feudal hierarchy, then I was clearly too toxic a fit for this company. Clearly, somebody who holds their tongue when it comes to contentious issues is a dangerous asset in a workplace environment. But surely this in itself is not reasonable grounds for termination. At least not reasonable grounds for termination in a sane society, which obviously we don't live in. This is the Kali Yuga. Perhaps contributing to my suspicion that I was an enemy of a healthy society was that I did not fill out the bi-monthly voluntary shot surveys that were offered by my company. The simple survey asked whether or not you had gotten the shot, the number of shots you had gotten, and whether or not you intended to get the shot. Now, amongst my company, probably I only saw 1 or 2 results that said that they had not gotten the shot and that they were not intending to get the shot. But I would imagine that that number might be slightly higher. I myself did not answer the survey at all, because, after all, as the name implies, it was voluntary, no? But perhaps by not filling out this voluntary survey, I wasn't showing my dedication to the health and safety policies of the workplace. If you think about it, it makes sense. Surely me, being a fit and healthy male individual in my mid-20s, who lives in a city 7 hours from the nearest major urban center, was posing a major health risk to my colleagues, who comprised of several smokers and 1 underweight vegan. Clearly, my former colleagues cared more about health than I did. Clearly, they were better examples of healthy individuals. I digress. I've had enough of this rant. I don't think it's really productive to look back and make fun of the absurdity of the situation, because, as you and I know, In the Kali Yuga, everything is absurd. It is quite common in apocalyptic type situations for prophets to say that the sane will be considered insane in these times, and that insanity will prevail amongst the general populace. For their sanity, of course, the sane will be persecuted, will be laughed at, and harassed. As the prophecies of our ancestors foretold, this is the age of insanity that we live in. These are uncertain times, and those who reasonably have second thoughts about the advice given to them by their overlords, the same rulers that quite obviously hate them, are considered a threat to society. They need to be punished for their transgression of not agreeing with the status quo. I am one such dangerous person. For my transgression of holding my tongue and my opinions to myself, for my transgression of taking my health into my own hands and not making it other people's problems, I have been left without employment, without a means to pay for my lodgings or to put food on the table. Well, I would be unable to put food on the table had it not been for my precognition, had I not dedicated months to learning valuable hunting skills, to acquiring my firearms license and becoming proficient in the usage of firearms for the purpose of hunting, learning how to properly gut and butcher game animals, learning how to can, pickle, and preserve a variety of foods, and learning which species of local plant life, berries, and mushrooms are edible and which contain toxic poisons. You know, people laugh at people like us for learning these valuable skills, for learning to live off the land. I can guarantee you that in the coming months, when the situation goes from bad to worse, they won't be laughing then. Indeed, they will be cursing themselves for not having the intelligence and foresight to prepare for the future, for not learning to be self-sufficient, and for not forming bonds with other self-sufficient people who they could rely upon. Instead, they will find themselves starving and alone, or perhaps reliant upon the powers that be for survival, powers that actively work against their best interest, actively undermine their financial well-being, and actively sabotage the safety of their communities. In all honesty, the severity of the situation that we and the people of Western society currently find themselves in would be so absolutely horrifying if it wasn't for the fact that it was so comical. To an extent, perhaps we, the collective we, not you and I, of course, deserved this. Perhaps, like the ancient Romans, we deserved this for becoming so complacent, for resting on the laurels of our glorious forefathers and their achievements, for rejecting community and religious life in favor of hedonism and consumerism. Western society, as we know it, is dead, and perhaps the generations before us are to blame. We ourselves are definitely not without blame in this situation. It is the net accumulation of the lack of effort, the lack of foresight of the current peoples that has led us to our present situation. Perhaps then, it is time for us to leave this decaying corpse of a world behind. It is time for us to band together, form tribes, and return to those ancient ancestral values that allowed our progenitors to live a happy and fulfilling life in harmony with nature. The very same values and traditions that forged them into strong people and allowed them to stake their claim on the pages of history, to change the world for the better. Brothers and sisters, I believe our time to prepare is running out. With the time you have left, prepare yourself for the future. Learn skills that will be valuable to the survival of you and your kinsmen. Form groups, nay, form tribes of people who share common interests, share a faith in the gods, and share a desire to return to our ancestral values. Network with similar groups of people and work together to form communities. Communities that will adhere to the ancestral values of old and will worship the gods together in harmony. I myself will dwell not on the past. I will continue to prepare for the future, continue to prepare a better life, an alternative life for my loved ones, for my children, and for their descendants, for generations to come. To make the best of a bad situation, unemployment offers me a lot of free time. In this free time, I will continue to work hard and produce better content for this page, produce better information for you, my beloved listeners, so that you may better situation yourself in this crazy world we're living in. I will not dwell in darkness, but will turn towards my inner light and continue to stoke the fire of ancestral tradition, the very same fire that will help guide our people through this age of darkness and chaos. To give you an update on what I'm currently working on, you'll be happy to know that I'm currently working on putting together a book listing and outlining how to properly practice Indo-European paganism in the modern world. This book will be a combination of academic research as well as my own interaction with the divine and the wisdom I have gained after practicing raw, primal Indo-European paganism for several years now. I hope that this book, once it has been released, will provide you much comfort and solace and will help you better understand how to properly worship the gods of our ancestors. Of course, I will also continue working on new episodes of the Son of the North podcast. I hope that with the amount of spare time I have now, I can make podcasts that are better than the episodes I've released before. Podcasts that will be chock full of valuable information on the traditions and values of our ancestors, and episodes containing exciting, exclusive interviews with top personalities in our community. I am excited to announce that an episode of the Son of the North podcast featuring the modern Platonist, Dr. Boaz, is in the works. Dr. Boaz and I will be discussing comparative mythology from an Indo-European lens. I am so excited to have such a titan of the Indo-European community on the podcast soon. I hope that you will find this episode extremely informative and enjoyable. Some of you who are very close to me also know that I've been putting in a lot of effort towards the settlement project, as I like to call it. To sum up what this project is about quickly, I am working to establish a rural community where our people are offered a choice, an alternative life away from the modern world, where they can live happily in harmony with nature, focusing on bettering the lives of our children and practicing the religious traditions of our ancient Indo-European ancestors. I will continue to work on this project and will reveal more information as it is ready. In my spare time, I am also getting ready for this season's hunts and hope to cover these adventures in later episodes of the podcast. Now that you guys have a better understanding of my current situation and what I plan on doing going forward, I would like to wrap up this episode by giving a shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. My special thanks for this episode goes out to Trenton Yoder and Peter Winters. Seeing as you just listened to this episode and understand my current financial situation, if you are a fan of the show and appreciate the work I do for our community, I would ask that you please consider supporting me as a patron on Patreon. For as low as $5 a month Canadian, which is not a lot of money in real currencies, you can help me continue to spread the good word of our ancestral deities, to bring more of the lost members of our tribe together in love and knowledge of our ancestral traditions, and to help pierce the darkness in the Kali Yuga. Of course, your patronage is not without benefits, including early access to episodes of the Son of the North podcast, and access to exclusive episodes of the Son of the North podcast, often covering much more controversial topics, which will only be available on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show, but wish to remain anonymous, you can donate cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and Ethereum at the wallet links listed in the bio. As this is a spiritual endeavor for me and a matter of the heart, I want to do everything I can to ensure that there is no advertisements on this show. That being said, your patronage will go a long ways to supporting me and ensuring that this show continues in its growth and improvement. That's going to be all for today's episode of the Son of the North podcast, guys. I hope you enjoyed this short little glimpse into my current life. I'll end it off as I usually do. My name's Rex, and I hope you've enjoyed this momentary escape from the soul-crushing insanity of the Kali Yuga. May the gods bless you and your loved ones in the weeks to come.